Good evening, everyone. It is February 24, 2013. I'm Rene Ritchie, and tonight we are talking about Google getting further into hardware, what Apple's doing with services, the deal with defaults in iOS, and whether multitasking really matters. This is the iMore Show. Joining me tonight is David Chartier, who you might know from websites like Tua, Ars Technica, Macworld, and from amazing apps like 1Password. How are you, David?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being on. You were at the first Macworld I ever attended. You were the first person I met on going into the press room.
Really? That was your first?
Yes. It was a special moment for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, and you did well. You interviewed like a champ.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, you were one of I think David Barnard was my first interview, and you were like my second or third ever. And I was so scared I was forced into just, not being dumb.
What was it, 2010?
Yeah, maybe even 9 or 10. It was one of those.
Okay.
It was one where Phil Schiller keynoted and introduced us to the wonders of iWork.
Right.
The last Apple keynote.
I think I need to actually get back there. I haven't been the last couple of years, and next year I'm determined to go.
Oh, no. Yeah, 1Password had a booth. Rustam was there, a couple other people. It was very nice.
Yeah, they sent the right people. Like the customer service folks who are, like helping people day in and out. They know all that stuff inside and out. Really, really awesome folks. Did you get to talk to them?
Yeah.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, I harassed him almost immediately.
Right? Yes. Right.
I saw him. We did the Canadian bear hug of exchanging body heat to survive, and then we realized we didn't need to because we were in a warm climate for once, and then we went on about our business.
I have not been introduced to this bear hug. I'm going to have to ask him about that in a few weeks.
Well, he's a little bit Russian. I think we alternate different sides, but it works out well. It might be a hockey thing for all I know.
Knowing Rustam.
We had an interesting week, and the reason I thought about talking to you is that you did a series of really good, I want to call them blog posts, but they were really those kinds of posts that are as much questions as they are commentary, and they were mostly centered around what Google has been announcing lately, because it's been very un-Google-like.
Yeah, it has, and it's kind of abnormal for tech. I mean, where do you want to start with, like Google Glass?
Yeah, let's start with, I think that was the first one, and that's Google's wearable computing prototype beta thing.
the Google box in your eyeball.
Yes.
Yeah, it has been really, really strange because they announced it last year in like June, right? Or they didn't really announce it; they hyped it, right? They had a video and kind of showed off like
and
a really
Sergey
basic
threw
version.
people out of planes like Iron Man movie.
Right, and that is, I mean, tech has a way of trying to kind of hyping stuff and pre-announcing it, but I mean that was a year ago, and they're saying that it's probably not going to be available to mass market until next year. I mean, we're talking at least like a year and a half, 2-year lead time to announce something, which
it's almost Microsoftian in its scale.
Almost. But I think they're even taking Microsoft to task there. Like, and the only I've been thinking a lot about this. Like, why are they hyping it so early on? Why are they dragging it out with this whole contest right now?
Yeah, so it's a contest, right? So if there were some people who were allowed to pre-order them at Google I/O last year, and I know Android Central, our friends Android Central tried, a bunch of other tech bloggers tried, but those haven't shipped yet. But now they're doing this contest where you put a hashtag and then you tell them what you're going to do with it. And if you win, you get to send them $1,500 odd and then fly to New York, LA, or San Francisco to pick one up and I guess get it personally attuned for you.
Yeah, and with this kind of device that is so radically different, I mean, it's not a new smartphone running, 4.5 of whatever the next thing is. I mean, this really is a radically different device, and they're obviously still in the middle of perfecting it and making it, kind of giving it shape. So that, in a way, that kind of makes sense. Yeah. But obviously, compared to everything else, that's bizarre, making people fly somewhere to go get something. And then why are they hyping it? Why are they giving it such a long runway? And the only thing that I can figure is that, who was it? Jean-Louis Gasset?
Yeah.
I think if I'm saying his name right, he wrote a great post the other day about everybody's chasing the next big
Yeah,
thing,
absolutely.
right? Is it going to be wearable tech? Is it going to be this other kind of stuff? And wearable tech kind of is starting to seem like it. There's lots of rumors going around. Lots of companies are kind of starting to talk about it, and now Google is obviously messing around with it. It seems to me like everybody is kind of chasing after this right now. What could we do with wearable tech? And Google's not really a hardware company. They bought a hardware company. They
Yeah.
bought Motorola, but
And they've had
Google's
ODMs make their phones to date.
right. So it seems to me like they realize this is where this is going. Everybody's probably messing with this stuff, but Google's not a hardware company.
Yeah.
And this seems like a play to me to get way out ahead of everybody and steal some mind share from companies that are hardware companies. They're much better at hardware than Google is, but Google is much better at everything else those companies are not.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And Steve Streza in the chat room and Herbert in the chat room are saying that, according to The Verge, they're targeting a holiday 2013 release. And Sock Rowlett is saying that Apple announced the iPhone well beforehand. But Apple announced the iPhone, I guess, to get ahead of FCC announcements. They wanted to be the one to get it out there, not have it leak from an external source.
Yeah.
And the iPad was announced early so that developers could have a chance with the SDK. Google Glass was so far ahead of announced. And let me just preface this by saying that, this is not, I'm not bashing Google here because a lot of people think there's an Apple-Google rivalry, but almost every Apple user I know is also a huge Google user. Almost all of us use Gmail, Google Calendar.
Everyone's a Google user,
Yeah,
right? I mean, let's just be honest here.
And this will tether to a Wi-Fi hotspot, including iPhones. It'll BT tether to iPhones. So this will absolutely be a complementary product if you want it to be. It's just not your typical Google product. This is like taking the beta and the Gmail invite to the next generation.
Yeah, and even with those pre-announcements, other product pre-announcements, the iPhone was 6 months ahead of time.
Yeah.
And what they were showing on stage seemed pretty much to be done, with what they actually shipped. I remember they had that kind of, the last couple of weeks they announced, they surprised you with a couple of things, like I think a YouTube app and another app or two.
The screen became glass because Steve was upset with key scratches.
Yeah. It was generally the finished product, and Apple likes to surprise people, right?
Yeah.
That's their thing. So yeah, I'm not really bashing Google for this. I don't want to come off the wrong way. I mean, I do have my gripes with Google. If anybody follows what I write and stuff, but I've got gripes. Who doesn't have gripes with stuff, right?
And we have gripes about Apple, which we'll get to later on in the podcast.
Yes. It just seems odd. It's a hype something a year and a half, maybe 2 years ahead of time, and that's what it seems like. They're trying to get mind share out there because Google has all this rocking search stuff, which is really the heart of this device, right? This device is constantly searching the world around you and paying attention to the context of what you're doing and pulling up information, kind of like what you see with Google Now in Android phones. And so they're trying to get that out ahead of everybody, and I think make people realize that they kind of are the leader in contextualizing your world.
It was interesting because right after there was a bunch of Apple Watch rumors recently, and immediately Samsung announced the Watch, and the headlines were all Samsung beats Apple to the Watch, and that's weird because Apple is always beaten to everything. They're almost never the first person to market with any. I mean, maybe the Mac was the first to market graphical user interface because Xerox never went anywhere with theirs, but there was Trios and Visor phones and Blackberries before the iPhone. They were a decade of tablet PCs before the iPad. Apple did not enjoy any first mover advantage other than first mainstream user experience advantage with any of those products.
Mm-hmm. It's the weird perception that goes back and forth. Like, you might see phrasing of Apple having the first smartphone that did it right.
Yeah.
But they haven't been first with most things, and I don't. In general, I don't know if you need to be when it comes to this kind of stuff, or at least when it comes to Apple. Like, they want to do this kind of stuff right. And let's be honest, it seems like Google has been spending a lot of time on this. I forget where I read it the other day, but I think someone said that Google Glass has been in the works for 3 years before they announced it last year.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that's what Sergey Brin has been working on in the Google Labs for the last immediate past. And it's an interesting idea. I mean, we see this in the movies all the time. There was things like, Iron Man has the modern incarnation of Jarvis stuck inside his helmet, and we spoke to Hal. We speak to Siri now, and there's always been this. Geordie LaForge, he tweeted that for me it would be a downgrade. Why I want Google Glass. One of the best.
Good.
LeVar Burton, one of the best tweets ever. So we've seen all these things around us. It's one of those things where you have it in science fiction before you have it in reality. So it seems like a next step, but sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're ideas that we play around with for a while.
Yeah, and this is something somebody had mentioned, was kind of offering a counterpoint to Apple's stake in all this, that the iPad in general wasn't really something new. Like you just said, we had tablets lying around for a while, and the iPad was just a really good refinement of it. This really is something that hasn't really been done before, besides sci-fi, which generally doesn't count because nothing really works like anything you've seen in the movies,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And so they need to spend time on this to get it right. Not just from the Google perspective and doing everything that it feels like it should do and making it feel really natural like it does in the videos, but also especially coming back to the whole hardware point. Google is not a hardware company. That's one of their weaknesses. And so they need to spend time to get that right, because if this thing looks really, really weird, if the hardware is bad, if people don't want to wear the extra little pack thing that you have, that's going to be a huge barrier. Just like when cell phones were too large and the buttons didn't work right or whatever.
Giant antennas.
That could be a really, really big obstacle that they might not be able to get over if they don't get the first version right.
And it's interesting because Microsoft is making hardware now. I mean, they made the Zune, they're making the Surface, they make the Xbox, and I flash back to that All Things Digital conference when Steve Jobs and Bill Gates were sitting on stage, and Steve Jobs trotted out the Alan Kay line again about people who want to make great software make their own hardware. And Gates said, we have a different opinion on that. But increasingly, the companies who are really well known for software and services, I think, are realizing that you need that vertical integration. Otherwise, you don't get the best solution. You get something that you need exorbitant hardware just to overcome the lack of integration with the software.
Right. It's the way that almost all the big players are going. Google bought their own hardware company, right? Or at the very least, Google's been partnering like very, very closely with specific partners for all the big Android phones, right? So even if before they bought Motorola, they've been working very, very closely with, I think it was HTC and then Samsung for a couple of them. They're getting, the whole industry is getting that you need that whole vertical integration. So it makes total sense. And this could really go down a rabbit hole, but to me, I'm starting to worry that in some ways this is making the entire industry even more entrenched in their own, so to speak.
Almost like ghettoized.
Right, because Apple with iCloud, for example, all your stuff is going to be in iCloud eventually, if it isn't already. And how are you going to get it all out of there and switch to Android? If you just get fed up with Apple one day, how are you going to get all your stuff?
Thousands of dollars in apps, how are you going to get those over to?
Right, that's the killer for me. Like I just picked up a Windows phone, and I hate that name.
Yes, I know.
And I've been thinking about that. Like, what if I really wanted to do the 1 month thing of I want to get a new task manager for Windows Phone. I want to get my my text editors and all the other stuff that I do on my iPhone. And it's like that money is going to rack up if I ever really wanted to make this switch. And just that by itself, but then also how would I get all my stuff out of SkyDrive and go to iCloud if I got fed up with Microsoft? Everyone is building these big walls around their platform.
They're almost like half gaming console. It would be so hard to switch from PlayStation to Xbox because all your games are on Sony discs.
And all your accessories, none of your, God to help you, your accessories are not going to plug into anything that the other guys make. Even if everything's going Bluetooth, they'll find a way to make their Bluetooth not talk to the other guy's Bluetooth. That's becoming a real concern, but that could be a whole separate show.
Well, the interesting thing to me about Glass is that it came in between two things that were also interesting. Google announced the Nexus Q at I/O last year, which was a strange orb that you put in your living room, and it was expensive, and it would only work if you had an Android phone. And I know, Phil Nickinson from Android Central loves his, but Google canceled it before it even shipped, and they just gave people their money back. Then this came out, and now this week Google announced the Pixel, which is their version of a Retina MacBook, but it's entirely Chrome OS based, entirely cloud based. So they took an operating system that is as light as possible and put it on amongst the most powerful hardware in the industry. And it's expensive. It's like $1,400.
And the whole purpose of the Chromebooks until now was, a really enabling platform, super cheap, great for schools. They've all been like $200-300 up until now, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And in a way, the first thing that struck me was that was just bizarre. I mean, I remember poking fun at it and thinking it's really weird. And in general, I still do. It's completely.
It's not a traditional Google product, which is super cheap, super convenient, and you exchange information for access to what they make.
It's antithetical to what the company has been driving at and doing all this time. And I'm totally a fan of switching things up, and doing something different. So I've been thinking about it more, and in a way, it makes sense because look at what Microsoft is doing with the Surface and the Surface Pro. They're making these premium devices. I mean, you can have your gripes with the Surface and such, but that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make this super premium device. They're trying to pitch to the right people. This does everything. So an iPad starts at $500, or I guess $330 now. Well, this is a tablet that does both iPad and desktop PC, and the price is right in the middle. And that message makes sense in a way.
It's halfway between an iPad and a MacBook Air.
Right. And so you're going to pay that premium price to get all of that. And so Google, in a way, it feels like they're trying to do that here, where they're saying, you know what, Chrome OS can be awesome, and we can make incredibly beautiful hardware with a gorgeous display that you just want to lick.
And you can touch it.
Right. It's just the thing that bugs me about Chrome OS in general is that, is it the first one that has a touchscreen?
It's the first laptop of that caliber. I mean, there's Windows laptops with touchscreens, but it's the first
Chromebook.
Yeah,
first Chromebook,
that
right?
I'm aware of, yes.
And so it seems odd to me to do that. Like you can gripe about Microsoft making Windows suddenly touchable and whole chunks of Windows not really coming along for it. They built sort of that Surface UI, and there's a lot of it that is touchable. But once you flip out of that and you're back at the regular Windows desktop,
the surface of the Surface is touchable.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's good. But I mean, the vast majority of the web is not touchable. They're creating this premium hardware, and it looks like a beautiful machine. But and I haven't used a Chromebook personally, so everybody correct me if I'm wrong, but it's basically a web operating system, right? Yeah. It's basically a browser. It just seems strange to me to slap touch onto the entirety of the web when the vast majority of the web, I mean, Apple's done some good work on getting a lot of the web touchable, but the vast majority of the web is still not ready for touch, and it just seems like a weird proposition.
Again, to me, it's weird because it's Google. If Apple released, even if Apple did Glass, let's say, or Apple did the Pixel, it wouldn't seem that odd to me because I'm used to really expensive, future-thinking Apple products. The iPhone came out; it was $600 odd, and it didn't even have apps. Like you couldn't even run third-party apps on it. So,
don't remind me.
Yeah, so that I'm fine with. But I've tried to live in just Safari on the iPad, and I've tried to live in just Chrome on my MacBook Air, and I can't do it. Within 30 minutes, I'm desperate for native apps. And the idea of spending more money than an Adobe CS6 suite on a computer that can't run Adobe CS6, to me is an odd notion when I'm thinking of future-looking devices.
Yeah, then that's a really good bar to use. If it can't run Adobe CS, why does it cost more than CS? That's good. I haven't. It seems like a lot of Google stuff, even Google's own apps, which is obviously what they want you to be using, aren't even really optimized for this, right?
Yeah, their apps are odd. It's almost like as much as we fought, well, I didn't fight. I wasn't in the streets picketing, but as much as people wanted an open internet after IE6, it seems that with all the extensions, and you guys probably know this at 1Password better than anybody, all the web browsers are also becoming distinct entities on their own. The stuff you do in Chrome is not the same stuff you can do in Safari anymore, and Microsoft is still off in their own corner. So as much as Google's doing for the open web, they're also creating, as much as any closed company, this really unique browser ecosystem.
Right, right. There's going to be some sort of strange lock-in, however you look at it, and you can get cynical and look at it as they're doing that intentionally, and you can also look at it as that's just part of life. If you want to make a great experience within the constraints of whatever you're going for, the reality is that it's usually somewhere in the middle. But I'd like to see where Google takes it from here, because I haven't seen. It doesn't look like a lot of their own apps. Like they're not, leading first and optimizing all of their apps for this touchable Chrome OS experience. That would be really
Yeah.
interesting if they had at least done that, because then you would have sort of a framework. Me, John Doe, I run whatever web service, and now I have at least an idea of what Google wants stuff to work like on a touchable Chromebook.
Sort of what Apple did with iOS for mobile devices.
Yeah, yeah, developer guidelines and all the buttons and the typical stuff that you should use, the building blocks that you should use to make your website work properly.
Web UI kit.
Yeah, yeah, and that's a good as name as any for it. That would be interesting, but as it stands, it just seems like this really kind of weird in between device where it's this awesome, beautiful premium experience. Do we know if someone built it for them? I mean, is that like an
Someone must have, because I don't
HTC?
believe they don't have factories, so it's probably some sort of, worst case, is some sort of Foxconn-like facility that just built whatever they designed.
Okay,
But they don't have their own manufacturing, and it's probably, Apple's made Retina screens now, and those are out in the market, so there's probably everybody using them.
right. Yeah, I'd like to see where they go from here, and maybe they just still need to take that step. Google, like a lot of those other companies, is starting to ship first and ask questions later, which certainly has its merits. And maybe they'll ask some questions and get us some answers,
There's a
as
couple
it rolls out.
There's a couple of really interesting things for me here. Like, first of all, as an iOS user, if I was a traditional, like my mom or my sister, I couldn't use the Chromebook because it doesn't run iTunes. And that might be a feature for a lot of people used to running iTunes on Windows. But for an iOS user who's looking for a laptop, doing something different comes with a compatibility cost. But even more interesting to me is it is proving so much easier for Google to become like Apple than it would be for Apple to become like Google. Because Google can buy Snapseed, they can buy Sparrow, they can buy all these companies, all these designers, all these developers, make much better looking products, and even now start pumping out their own hardware, where to build a server-side infrastructure as good as Google's just seems like it would be a much bigger task for Apple, evident by Game Center going down, by iCloud going down, by iMessage being confusing, and
Yeah,
Siri being
clearly.
wonky.
Clearly, it is. I mean, if you got to be real about it. That is proving to be a challenge for Apple. I mean, how long have they been trying to get web services, just the core set of web services like email and calendaring and notes and all the basic stuff right? And they've been having a hard time with that. And I don't want to belittle those challenges at all. First of all, I'm not a developer, so I don't ever want to be one of those people. And I'm sure like Steve would shoot me, but I don't want to be like, this should be simple.
Yeah,
I don't
just
understand
throw
what
developers at it.
it's a tough challenge, and companies are having various amounts of success with it. And iCloud I tentatively want to say it's seeming to be one of Apple's best efforts so far.
Yeah.
It seems to be staying up pretty well. Apps are probably not adopting it as fast as Apple would like, but I see more and more doing it. But
Although some have shied away, some have very publicly said that they've really tried to make iCloud work and it hasn't, so they've gone back to their own solutions.
yes, for certain types of apps, yeah, I have seen that. What do they run into? Like core data?
Well, I think the core data stuff is hard. The document sync is hard. I think the key store value is much easier.
Yeah. So they're running into cases where it kind of falls apart, and I'd imagine they're going to try and fix that, because Apple probably wants to open this up to everybody because they want everything in iCloud. For various reasons, of course, but that has proven to be a challenge for Apple since iTools and .Mac and MobileMe and now iCloud. And I think you have a really good point there. They're using the web in a different way. They're not putting everything on the web. The web is kind of becoming
it's not their
the
single
highway.
truth store.
Right. It's more becoming a conduit for getting your stuff from one place to another and making sure it stays the same. But it's been a challenge. You're totally right.
And it's interesting because, like, as much as you might look at Google with, fumbling with the Nexus Q and, what they're doing with Glass and what they're doing with Pixel, they're doing it. And, Apple's doing the online stuff, Google's doing the hardware now, and these companies are no longer. I have this what if dream world where Google and Apple had never split up and they were still best buddies and they were making this one awesome phone in our pockets that had, premium Apple hardware, fantastic Google services. But we don't live in that world. But now we're living in a world where Apple is slowly, painfully going into services and Google is slowly, painfully going into hardware. And I think it's a good competitive world for us.
There's a long discussion to be had about why and how and where everyone got this idea that they have to do everything.
Yeah.
And it's obviously proving to be a challenge for everyone. Where their weakness is, it is a weakness.
Yeah.
And there's a very good argument for them not ever having to have gotten into that at all.
I mean, there is a graveyard full of Zunes that would prove that point too.
I liked the Zune, by the way.
I did
want to
too,
go on
but
record with that.
I know a lot of people who have barely given it up now. The service is dead, but it was just it wasn't targeted. Like, it didn't do what it had to do. It didn't do the job Microsoft hired it to do.
Yeah, and the whole Brown thing was probably a mistake.
And the squirting nomenclature.
Let's just squirting. Oh, I never ran into anyone who actually used that term in public. Not even like hipsters. I'm in Chicago, right? So you would think hipsters would have been like, they would have tattoos of like squirting, on the back of their neck or something. Never.
Even the guy with the Zune tattoo did not have a squirt tattoo to go with it.
No, he did not.
So the other thing that you wrote that was really interesting is, and a lot of people have been talking about it, it's this idea of default apps. Because on OS 10, on Windows, on any desktop operating system, you can say, I want to use this app for these kinds of associations. But on iOS, regardless of whether you use Chrome or Dolphin or any other browser, links will automatically open in Safari. Mail will go to mail.app. Anything that you can think of, the Apple default app, it'll go to Maps instead of going to Google Maps if you prefer. And you've been asking, you're one of the people who've been asking for this functionality. And I wonder if this is something that's, Apple will never cede control of default app status for their own internal reasons, or if it's something like cut and paste where it's on Joswiak's list, but hey, it took us 3 years to get there, and maybe this is on the roadmap for 4 more years.
First of all, how much time do we have?
We have a good half hour.
Yeah, this is something that I really truly do believe, because and every now and then when it gets brought up, I know we've had those conversations on Twitter and stuff, and I've had a couple developers, engineers reach out to me and sort of try and explain the position, and the general assessment is that Apple says right now, if you have a problem, file a bug report.
Yeah. Radar or GTFO.
Yeah, we'll see if this is something that we feel is worthy to add into Mail, Safari.
Yeah.
If it fits with our core ethos and our vision for that app. And the problem is, I want Apple to have that vision for their core apps. I totally believe that Mail and Safari and Notes, I'm totally on board with them being super, super simple. The basic stuff, what Apple has done at least since OS 10, which is when I jumped on board. So I don't feel comfortable talking even farther behind that, but give the base core stuff that most users need. And they've always had the approach of, if people need more, they can go get it.
Yeah.
And that is what they abandoned, because you can go out and get, whatever crazy new mail client. You can go get Mailbox. You can go get Sparrow,
Gmail.
I use iCab as a browser, and I slave along and deal with it. I don't even jailbreak to turn it into my default browser or anything. I'm totally
pure as a driven snow.
Yeah, and the problem is you can't go out and get the tools that you actually need to get the work done that you want to.
Or at least Apple doesn't provide them. You are left to super user jailbreak status if you want them.
Yeah, and that's always an option, obviously. I feel like that, that's something that probably needs to be stated, but the typical user like me, who I don't want to jailbreak, I don't want to mess with that stuff. I just want to go into settings somewhere and flip a switch and be able to set, I don't even use Mailbox, but I want to use Mailbox as my default client. I don't have that choice, and so I'm shackled to Apple's apps.
And it took the jailbreak about 5 months to come out after the iPhone 5, so it's not always an option either.
Right, and not to get into this philosophical discussion about it, but just in case we need to put it on the table so people understand where I'm coming from, I don't want to jailbreak because the only reason jailbreaking exists is that it's because it's some kind of a security flaw that they find, right? And whether that's totally fine, whether that's just the way it needs to be, and people need to wait 5 months after every release or whatever, and that's just the way it should work. I don't want to have to do that. I don't want to have to leave that door open. I don't want to have to dig around and mess with files and
There's no
worry
WebOS Konami code that's built in by Apple to unlock your device.
Yeah, and I don't want to talk this up too much because it's not nearly as much of an issue anymore. To their credit, the jailbreaking industry has gotten really good, but I don't want to have to keep playing this cat and mouse game with this thing that Apple hates that we're doing on its platform.
Yeah.
For better and for worse. But the problem is Apple's apps at the core, Apple's apps should have the vision that they have. I'm totally on board with that. They should be that. I don't want Apple's apps to turn into the Microsoft Office of Mail and Safari and calendaring. But we need the ability to go beyond that when our tools and our needs move beyond those things. I need Text Expander on my iOS device. I do a boatload of email. I do a boatload of writing on iOS. I need Text Expander to do that.
And there is a Text Expander app, but it has to be inputted. It has to be integrated by third-party developers into third-party apps, and it does not work with Apple apps.
Right. So every developer has to build in support for Text Expander. Every developer has to build in support for adding a Chrome button to the share menu when you want to open a link somewhere else. It's
every developer has to add a 1Password hook if they want to integrate with 1Password.
It's creating an unnecessary burden on the entire ecosystem, but especially the end users who end up growing beyond the needs that they grow beyond. They develop needs that Apple's tools can't provide, and suddenly we're just shackled to them because that's basically the answer that we get out of Apple. And that I've actually been meaning to write a follow-up. I want to email a couple people who said that I could talk to them. I've been meaning to write a longer piece about that. So hopefully I can get that out soon. But yeah, it's something that I feel like, I don't know if we can still pick up pitchforks and torches and such.
I mean, from Apple's point of view, it's not like Apple is incredibly, I don't want to say slow, it's the wrong word. They're incredibly deliberate and methodical. Like they keep APIs private, but when they release a public API, it's not like some other companies where that public API will change willy-nilly. They'll support that public API for a long time. And when you get behind the scenes, I mean, Springboard, and if you're interested, we had Grant Paul, CHPwn from Jailbreak on Debug this week, and he explained a lot of what he discovered about Springboard. And it's not this beautiful, modular, expansive, wonderful framework on the inside. It's this giant blob of things, and there might be actual programmatic reasons why Apple hasn't done this yet, and they did split Springboard now, so you have Springboard and Backboard. So the windowing isn't completely tied into the app launcher anymore. And they did port over XPC, so you have some framework for cross-app communications. But it's still, like, as mature as iOS is, there's still all of this lack of maturity. And when you start talking about things like default apps, you have to have a system in place that will, handle collisions, make sure the data types go to the right app and there's no confusion or ambiguity in those. Because I've been using a Nexus 4 for a while, and you have shared intents and you have default apps, and it's not as simple as I think an Apple solution would need to be for those things. So as much as I want it to, I wonder if there aren't still, roadmap issues for them deploying it.
And that I'm sure is the case. This is another one of those situations where I do not want to be those people who are like, it should be easy. They should just be able to add a button. Just give me a button and I can open my email in whatever. What are these guys getting paid for? And that certainly, I'm sure this is a massive undertaking. And if there is actual evidence that they're moving towards that, I'm curious, but the thing that really irks me is that the answer that I've gotten from people who work at Apple who have reached out is no, just file a bug report and we'll see if that's something that's worthy of going into our apps, basically. And that I feel is the who knows? Maybe that's just supposed to be the boilerplate, PR answer because they're actually hiding the fact that maybe they're working on this in the background. Well, that's
an engineering answer. So if you ask an engineer, they will usually say, what's the radar? Because they can't do anything without a radar number. And a product manager can't come over and say, do this, because they will ask, what's the radar number? But I think when you get high enough up the chain, you have maybe not Federici level, maybe before him even, there are people who have product feature roadmaps on their whiteboards that aren't dependent on radars.
Okay. So there's a shot, perhaps.
It would be, and the other thing, I think Steve Strezzo was on the Command Space podcast, and he's in the chat room now, and he says smart things, and he was talking about whether things like intents or what Windows Phone has for contracts could obviate some of the need for default apps, because apps could intercommunicate when they have functions that they could do. Those functions could be exposed. Rather than rather than having a strict default for an app, you could start just having instances of apps and features from apps show up when they're called for.
Sure.
I wonder if you build out that system, whether that becomes like a super version of, Instagram can take photos. So you want to take a photo, you don't need the photo app. You can choose Instagram as the intent for photos.
Right. Right. And in some ways, again, as a layman, I don't understand everything that's happening in the background here, but in some ways it feels kind of like they have some of the framework set there, because you can go get an email client, a contact, an alternative to contacts and calendars, and almost everything you want to do in iOS right now. Almost all those alternatives actually exist.
Yeah.
It's just that they're handicapped by the way iOS works, and you can't set them as a default, but they all use, with a few exceptions, they all use the same database store, I guess, of information. So like if you go out and get an alternative contacts manager, it's still talking to like the same contacts database that Apple's app is using. If you go get, I don't know if they do it with notes, but like a calendar app, Fantastical is another great example. I use Fantastical a lot. It's still talking to, I guess, the same calendar database. So like that half of it is at least there. They're still dumping information into the same place and pulling it out. It just, as an end user, it just feels like I can't flip the switch and make, when I tap on a calendar appointment in an email app, I can't make Fantastical, eat what seems like
you have to go there and pull the data. You can't ever push data to Fantastical. It's not a push experience. It's a pull experience all the time. You have to go there and get it. It's never given to you.
Yeah.
And Strezza's pointing out too. The Strezza guy's talking a lot of smart stuff again today. He's pointing out that when the iPhone came out, there were no third-party apps, and it's unclear that there were ever intended to be third-party apps until a discussion was had at Apple, and the powers that be were convinced that they should have third-party apps. So the architecture of this, as much as I give Google a really hard time about Android not being a very good user experience because it was built to be a BlackBerry. It wasn't built to be an iPhone. Apple's thing was never built to handle all these third-party apps and multitasking, all that stuff. That's all retrofitted in, starting in later versions of iOS. So to his point, they have a lot of stuff they have to build out to make that a really good experience.
Yeah, so it's, it could just be a case of Apple measuring twice and cutting once.
We got to fix a lot of stuff, so we'll get to those default apps. But first, we're digging in the foundation here. Don't pay any attention to the guys in the construction helmets.
And granted, this is probably a fairly power user thing too, right? I have no illusions that the vast majority of the 500 plus million users really want to swap out Sparrow for Mail on their iPhone. This is certainly a niche, power user kind of thing.
But there are people who use Chrome on the desktop, and then they want those Chrome tabs to sync to their iPhone, so they have to use Chrome as their browser, but then it can't be their default browser, so it becomes a cycle.
And at the end of the day, granted it's a niche thing, but it feels like a philosophical stance that Apple has always had, and it abandoned. Maybe it is just a technical thing. Maybe it is just a really complex project to take on, but it feels sort of like this philosophical step back in giving people the choice to use the tools that they want to use. So maybe it's just taken a while to start moving forward again.
That was the other thing that you wrote too that I quite liked was I've been experimenting. Actually, a friend of mine put Ubuntu on my Nexus 4, so I was playing around with that, and it's got like 3 or 4 functional apps. The others are all screenshots at this point, so it's really early days. But they were talking about having multitasking views, multiple Windows views on the tablet, which is something Android does too when they implement their tablet UI. I think there's like less than a score of apps that do it, but it's a possibility. And Apple doesn't do that. In fact, they banned apps that put up multiple windows at the same time. And you were arguing about whether that was like a feature that had merit to be added to iOS.
Yeah, I've caught myself doing it Actually, very recently. I tried using a text editor on my iPad, and it's called WriteUp. Uh, I've been using writing kit for a really long time, and WriteUp is kind of the same thing. It's a text editor and it has a browser built in. And one of the things it can do is separate out your
Yeah.
browser and your text editor, and so you have them both side by side. And I actually did find it useful for what I was doing. I was trying to get stats from a web page and write about them and make sure I'm getting my facts right so I don't sound like an idiot. And
I should try that
but
sometime. It sounds helpful.
it's a good idea. But like I do a lot of people watching, especially when it comes to tech, because I constantly have to beat back into my head that a lot of the stuff that I want to do and the way that I think about tech is not how most people do it.
Hmm.
You know, and so I go out to coffee shops and especially in Chicago, like you can get in the middle of a lot of business meetings. I don't know why they're doing it in Starbucks, but hey, uh, and I watch how other people use this tech, and I rarely see anyone using something that is not full screened, which has always seemed ironic to me because for the last 30 years, what I guess we should now call post or pre PCs,
Pre PCs, yeah.
all the PCs that were over there,
The pre post PCs.
yeah, they were obsessed with multitasking, right? Processors
Yeah.
that have 4 cores in them, and
Preemptive multitasking.
yeah, they're going to multitask before you even know that you want to.
Yeah.
And people don't use computers that way. They full screen Excel, they full screen Safari, and we have these web pages that are like 500 pixels and then like 8,000 pixels of white space
Yeah.
that's doing nothing. And so it just seems like one of those things where they're going, we've got multitasking on our tablet over here, and it's just something that most people just don't care about. It seems like a weird thing to trumpet in this space.
No, my mom had. I've told the story many times. My mom had a PC. I ended up giving her a Mac, and she would call me and say, "Oh, my internet is gone." And what do you mean? And I'd have to go over there, and her web browser would be behind Word, and to her that was gone. She couldn't see it; it was just gone.
Mhm.
But we gave her an iPad for her birthday, and now it's home button, launch Safari, home button, launch Pages, home button, launch an app, and
Right.
she's always spatially aware. She knows exactly what app she's in, and she has that escape hatch of the home button. And whenever she's lost, she can just press that. All her apps are there, and she can press the one that she wants again. And for her, that takes all the stress out of using computers.
And there's something to say that in a market like this, especially when it comes to tablets, where Apple has tablets wrapped up a little bit more than smartphones. Competitors might feel like they're in the situation where they need to talk about anything that can get them attention above and beyond what Apple might have. But it just feels like that's the wrong thing to go after. It feels like most people aren't really going to care about that stuff. The power users sure are. I mean, I read, Kevin C. Toffel
Yeah.
over at GigaOM. He's huge on the Surface and Android, and he's loving all that stuff. But he's a nerd like the rest of us.
Yeah.
Statistically speaking, he and I and most nerds like us are basically a rounding error. That's not stuff that's going to resonate with most people.
It was interesting though, because I wasn't this guy when I was younger. When I was starting off at work, I was the build your own PC guy. I would buy the parts, I'd put it together, I ran everything, and the idea of using an iPhone would have been anathema to me back then. But I got to a certain point at work. It was right when Vista came out. You can make of that whatever you want. And a friend of mine who was a hardcore Linux user, like not even Ubuntu, like deeper version of Linux, and that said, "You look like a kind of guy who doesn't want to work that hard to use computers anymore. Look like you need a break." So they got me a Mac, and it was so much easier. And now iPads and iPhones, you can say like, I just don't want to work. I want the stuff to work for me. I don't want to have to work for it anymore. And I feel like when I used a Nexus 7 and when I don't own a Surface, but I tried out a Surface, I had to start working again for a computer. And I'm really over that phase in my life.
Yeah, and I totally get that there is a decent chunk of people out there who want to care about whether their app is stored on the SD card or the main memory.
Yeah, and they want to flash a different custom ROM every day if they want to.
Yeah, and more power to them, and I totally believe that should be out there for them. It's just I don't think that that's what most people want to care about. I start talking about some of that stuff, and my wife's eyes glaze over, and she starts looking like she doesn't know me anymore.
Are you doing a bit
So
from Star Trek? Because are you still speaking to me? I don't understand what you're saying.
yeah, so I just try to stay mindful of that and watching what regular people actually do and care about with their devices.
Yeah.
So but even and to actually get into it, I haven't thoroughly researched this, so maybe somebody in the chat room can shoot me down. But as I understand it, some of these features that Samsung is introducing, like the split screen stuff, they're not. I don't think they're actually. I don't know how you describe it, like commit it back to the Android source. Like it seems like they're keeping these for their tablets, and it only works with their apps on the tablets, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of that. I mean, there are NVIDIA apps that, there are games that only take advantage of NVIDIA stuff, and there's, Motorola has Moto Blur, and HTC has Sense, and Samsung used to call it TouchWiz. I don't know what they call it now, but they all have their own layers on top of Android. You used to call them skins, but they're not skins anymore because you can't just pull them off. They're actually deeply integrated.
Yeah, which turns into its own bag.
Samsung had S Voice, and then Google put out Google Now, so you can. I mean, just see. This is the thing for me. I'm getting so lazy. When Siri came out, I got too lazy to use a keyboard anymore. So I don't want to type messages. I just wait for Siri. I press a button and I dictate it. And Google Now too. I'm waiting for that next big leap in interfaces so that I don't even have to worry about using multi-touch anymore.
And you've struck to the heart of what all of this stuff is about. These devices are enabling us to get incredibly lazy.
Yes.
And that is one way to put it, because I had the same experience. Like I built PCs for the first, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years of my life. And, I even worked for a small time distributor where I could order parts and stuff. I still remember the day when I ordered a Pentium 3 600 megahertz because I was getting out of there. I was going to go back to school, and I swapped it out for an 800 megahertz.
Nice.
When my shift manager wasn't looking. I finally got sick of it. Like, I don't want to deal with this crap anymore. And really it just comes down to we're all getting much lazier.
People are complaining that the new iMac is as tightly bound up as a MacBook Air. Yes, I can have Apple make it, ship it here, and it's just a thing. It's an appliance like a refrigerator. I stick it on my desk and I just go to work.
Although I will. Part of me though will complain about those. I mean, I love the way Apple is going with this stuff, and I'm glad they're there, and I'm glad there's other people that do stuff differently. Yeah. But I still remember the iMac G5s. I think the white ones, the white plastic ones.
Yeah.
Where you could set the iMac down, and it was I don't know 5, 6 screws or whatever, and the whole thing could pop off. And as a person who used to build PCs, that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Now you need the suction cup mitts to pull those screens off.
Yeah. I mean, you could get at the entire PC, just popping that one door off, and everything was spread out, and you didn't have to learn yoga and some weird move in order to flip up, a cable and get into the case or whatever. That was so wonderful.
The first time I opened a Mac Pro, because you just pull off the whole side of it, my mind blew up. I'd never seen a computer that could do that much, that looked that clean.
Yeah, the Mac Pro was a whole new level. I mean, that's like playing with Legos.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
And it's interesting the direction that they've gone, because that ease of use to me is, there used to be a time when I was younger where my money was much more important to me than time. I would much rather spend time on something than money, because, it felt like I had all the time in the world and I didn't have a lot of money. So that was a great deal for me. Now, it's starting to come to the point where I can throw money at problems. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. I'm saying that I am so busy, I get so little sleep, and I have so many things to do that if it costs me an extra $20 for Apple's RAM module rather than me having to unscrew and screw something on and do all this stuff, I will just let Apple put that in. Instead of jailbreaking, I'll just live with an iPhone, because I'm going to mess that up. I'm just going to leave that be and do it. I know it sounds horrible. It sounds like Wall-E, they're saying in the chat room, but I'm owning that.
I don't know what days you're shopping at Apple and getting RAM for $20.
No, $20 more than whatever the typical retail markup is.
$20, $20
like 100
per megabyte.
Right? Yeah,
I think you mean $20 per megabyte.
$100 more, $200 more. Yeah, that's true.
That is one thing. I feel like there needs to be just a book written about that, like 20 years from now. Like the person at Apple who made the decision to charge like 2-3 times the market rate for their RAM, because I really want to understand why they did that.
I think it's the same guy who charges twice as much for Adobe in Australia.
Maybe there's some AnandTech article that's tackled that. like they interviewed the right person, or maybe they like dismantled the RAM and took it down to like a molecular level,
Actually, you know
and
what?
they teach you why.
It's not that. My best guess, and it's not an informed guess, but my best guess is that has nothing to do with the actual technical people. It's marketing, that they take these computers and they say, this is the base price, and we'll give you increments of $100 that you can go up. And each of these $100 seems so reasonable that a lot of people will do it. And then, oh, just $100 more, I get this. $100 more, I get this. Oh, now look, I'm above the price of the better model. I'll just switch to the better model. Oh, look, for $100 more, I get this.
Yeah,
Sounds purely psychological to me.
yeah, they're people trained in how to get you.
Yeah. It's the same guys who make Zynga games.
Which I have successfully avoided. I would like to proudly state I have never played the Farmville or the Mafia Wars.
They were complaining about Real Racing 3 in the chat room. Jade was complaining about it because it's free to play now. It's no longer.
That's not a Zynga game.
No, but it's not a Zynga game, but they're adopting the freemium free to play model.
Oh.
That's like that was one of the big marquee iOS games, and now it's free to play, and you can spend money to get your car back on the track faster or to fix other things faster.
I've been really, not to completely get derailed here, but I've been really kind of in general. I'm weird about the whole free thing. It kind of bugs me because I don't know which direction the company is going to go in. But in a sense, I wonder if Apple kind of forced this on us with the way the store works without having demos.
They've been poor stewards. They've allowed a lot of devaluation in the App Store.
Right, and the more that I think about it, like I've tried a couple of games that are free to play for like the first couple levels, and then you drop $2 and the whole thing's unlocked or whatever. Like if they balance it out properly, that actually makes sense to me. You get a little bit of a taste, and if you like the whole thing, you pay for it. You take a car out for a test drive for free, and if you like it, you pay for it, right? But it's the whole when it's just when they run away with it, when you have to pay 99 cents just to have a keyboard to type on, and then you have to pay 99 cents to
when it feels hostile, like as a form of attack.
Yeah, when the game is actually designed to be a horrible experience until you pay up to get a couple of features. That is where those companies can take a walk.
Yeah, so it's funny, and I say this over and over again, that people will not pay $1 for a game, but they'll pay $99 to have a better looking Smurf hut than their neighbor. And it's pure psychology. It's the same thing that caused tulips to have value hundreds of years ago. We are an ego-driven, impatient people, and a lot of companies have hired psychologists to make products that tune into that need in us, and they're making a lot of money doing it. And Apple's not changing their rules, so it doesn't look like we're gonna get out of that anytime soon.
Yeah, and I guess I try to sleep a little better at night, thinking that to their credit, these people are doing their jobs exceedingly well because it apparently seems profitable, and so I'm not the hugest fan of what they're doing, but apparently they're kicking ass at it. So well done to them.
Well then, we'll leave it on that note. Dave, if people are interested, where can they find out more about you?
The easiest place to go is davidchartier.com. That's kind of the home base for everything that I do.
That's your hub.
Yeah, and then all the little weird little blogs that I have and stuff, and Twitter and app.net are you can find from there. So that's I'll just give you one place to go.
A one-stop Chartier shop.
There you go.
Awesome. Thank you very much for joining. I had a blast talking to you. We'll have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. This is a great setup. So thanks, man.
I appreciate it. There's so many interesting things to talk about. I keep joking that when I got hired to run iMore, I was like, it's one phone on one company. There's no way I'll have something to talk about every day. You guys are wasting your money hiring me. And every morning for a while, I woke up saying there's not going to be anything to do, and then something always happened.
Famous non-last words.
Yeah, still here. Damn it. All right, have a great night, Dave. Thank you, everyone in the chat room, for joining us. If you haven't joined us live yet, you are missing out because we have the smartest, best-looking, most charming community in mobile. You can find me at Rene Ritchie. You can find all of us at iMore for all of our shows, all of our beautifully new album-arted shows. You can go to mobilenations.com/shows. Have a great evening, everybody, and see you next week.